start out and read the land acknowledgement, and followed by Kara, who's going to read our anti-racism statement. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. I'll turn the meeting over to Kara.
Okay. So I am reading this on behalf of the SBCA Board of Directors. In response to recent racially motivated harassment of an SBCA board member, as the Board of Directors, we are compelled to make the following statement. The Sudden Valley Community Association, SBCA, stands against racism and in solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC. We acknowledge that the history of systemic oppression, white supremacy, and racism has widespread effects in our society to this day. In light of such systemic racism and standing in explicit opposition to these realities, we strive to create an inclusive community where the dignity of all members is equally defended. We believe that the vast majority of SVCA members share these values, and we will continually advocate for the voice of every member to be heard and respected. Despite widespread consensus, we have come to realize that it is not enough to assume that all members share these values. This conviction must be affirmed publicly. Therefore, we reject the expressions of racism that seek to divide this community. We contend that until we can say with confidence and without repudiation that Black Lives Matter in our society, there is much work to be done with respect to ensuring equal treatment for the BIPOC members of our community. Whenever possible and necessary, we will actively engage in difficult, transparent conversations and commit to dismantling racial biases by understanding and seeking to change barriers that have been created. We will also continually ensure that all voices are heard in an inclusive, respectful, responsible, cooperative, and equitable environment. In this regard, expressions of policy and priority differences are welcomed, but we do not consider racism to be a political opinion and will not tolerate it. We are committed to supporting community members and staff through an equity and anti-racist lens and advocating for any change that cultivates a more just environment.
Thank you, Ms. Kara. And at this time, I would like to move for the adoption of our agenda. Would anyone like to second that?
Seconded.
All right, perfect. Also, now we'll move next to the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes? I know there was a correction that was made. Does everyone have the opportunity? Is there anyone that has anything to add to that before? Okay. So I'm going to move to approve the February 17th minutes as corrected.
Second that.
Second.
All right, it's whoever can get to the unmute fastest, right? Great, thank you. Next, we'll move on to our capital request, and I'm going to hand the meeting over to Glenn for that portion.
Thank you. We're going to go through each one of them individually, but I had a couple of general comments I want to put out there before we go into it. First, we got a number of questions in advance, and we definitely appreciate those. I know we've got a number of them from our attendees here tonight, so I just wanted to acknowledge that we appreciate having those in advance. It helps us prepare. And some of this is some of my statements here are in answer to those, and I certainly will answer anything else we have. But first of all the items that we've brought forward today, we followed past practice in as best as we knew it. The people who have been bringing these forward are no longer here, and there isn't some of the documentation of background to it wasn't all there. So we've been preparing and doing that. So that's how we got where we are today. While we one of the concerns that has come up is that let me start again. Like the board and the community, we on staff value transparency. And in that vein, we've put together a work plan for particularly the CBC, but all of this work. We're trying to share everything that we have with the community, the committee, and ultimately the board. And so some of this stuff was put together before we even consider bringing this. The reason that we brought it forward the way it is because we are behind a timeline. We're behind. We should have been bringing this to you a long time ago. And of course, transitions and all the other things have brought that. So, and I want to be clear, we're not looking for to put pressure on the committee at all. That's not what we're trying to do. We just want to make sure that we're trying to do the best due diligence we can to keep things moving. We as staff will implement whatever you guide us to do. And so if you're not comfortable doing something tonight, please, by all means, don't move it forward, and we're not asking you to do so. We will, however, want to spell out what those repercussions would be if we delayed. And I just want to be clear, we're not trying to pressure anyone. That's not what we're doing. We just want to make sure you have all of the information that we have, and that's our intent. I also want to highlight that some of the past practice of previous staff was to not provide all the detail, and not always they had reasons. So I want to talk about that reason. One of them is that process does slow the process down. So going through the process slows everything down. What they felt, and based on what I see and how I look at things, they went through the process of making a choice. They made a choice. They felt if they went through the process, they couldn't serve the customer. And I'm going to say that they had that best intention in mind based on what I see and know right now. And so they made the choice to, rather than go through the process, I'm going to provide customer service and get the work done. I'm not saying that's right. And the reason we brought everything here and all the information is because we need to fix that. And the only way to fix it is to bring it to light. So that's why you see some information that is not the same. It may not have looked the same as it was. There are things that are included in the program that maybe in past history were not thought to be, but the work was being done that way. So we want to be clear that whether we fund it one way or another, or we don't fund it, that's the way it was being done by the previous staff to get the work done. So, and I want to be clear, I'm not blaming them at all. They were doing what they felt was right. That's what they did. We're going to do it differently. We're going to do it openly, and we're going to make sure that if there's a process needs to be fixed, we're going to fix it. If some work we're doing needs to be fixed, we're going to fix it. So I just want to put that out there, that's why the things look the way they do. And again, I really appreciate having the history from people who've been around the community and been through these processes, because it really helps us clarify things. So with that, we'll go through each proposal. We'll answer questions individually. I have staff here who will, I think it's pretty much Jacob and I will go through each of them. And then what we'll do is we'll go through them and get your questions answered and deal with them individually, so we don't get you all confused or us all confused, because there's a lot of information here. So I'll start with the first one, which is Southern Court repair. So in 2020, we had a slide out on Southern Court near gate 28, and it blocked the road and damaged the road. And what they did first was did an emergency, got the road cleared. Then they continued to do work. So the second step in that process was to evaluate what the problem was, fix the temporary solution, solidify it, make sure it wasn't going to slide again. They did that. Then they did a study, looked at what the solutions could possibly be, and looked at what the best solution and the most cost-effective one was. And so that's how we got to where we are today. There are three parts to the project that we're proposing. Part number one is stabilizing the hillside in a more permanent fashion, and that's the rock bolting, and then we want to make sure we protect the roadway if there is some sloughing, and that's what the concrete barriers will be. They'll be set permanently and spiked in so that slide stuff can come up there and we can clean out from behind it and it won't damage the road necessarily. And then the third part is to repair the roadway itself with paving to make sure that it's passable and at the highest level of maintenance we can. So those are the three parts of it. I know in the proposal and I will let you know that as we move forward, these proposals will be cleaned up and look much different. We have another one coming for stormwater eventually to give you a heads up, and that will look completely different and be a lot more easy to read and easy to computate the actual costs. I did want to highlight in each of the three pieces, there's contingency put in there. This project is really appropriate because, once you start messing around on the footing of a hill and you're bolting in, there may be other items that come up. It was also brought up that these were 2020 costs. Yes, they are. And I talked to Tyler, who is our project manager, who gave us these estimates or these costs. And he said, actually, he didn't expect anything to go up. He expected it to go down as far as us getting some costs because contractors are a little more hungry. So we didn't adjust the cost. We kept them at 2020 numbers, and that's why we left them that way. Wanted to be honest about that part of the process. And then he also felt if there was anything, the contingency would very well cover it. I did talk to him yesterday, and he mentioned that he's only had one project since he's been here that they use the contingency. So he's doing some good work for us, and we're having good contractors. I also wanted to highlight the fact that we need to get permission first from you and then from the board before we go out to bid and get a contractor on board. And Tyler helps us with that process. Once that's done, then the actual contract will go to the board for approval. So we have another check in the process before we go to full construction. So that's kind of the quick summary of the project, and I'm ready to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so I think I need to, with Robert's Rules of Orders, I think I need to make a motion and get a second before we have the discussion. So, and anyone feel free to correct me if I'm not, because I'm still learning Robert's Rules of Orders. So, Alex, did you have a comment, or were you seconding me before I made the motion?
Okay, yeah. Go ahead and make it.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion to request $189,271.37, including tax allocation from the roads account, for the long-term stabilization and asphalt repairs for the southern courts as a result of the landslide.
I second.
All right, thank you. Okay, any questions or open discussion for this memo request?
I have a couple, Lynn. So it makes sense, and I know it's a critical repair. I'm just, and it says it's from the roads fund, and it's from 2020. So I just want to make sure that, since it's not in the strategic plan, or it's not in the budget for 2021, if the funds are there, and if they're not, where they're going to come from.
That's a good question. I looked down here and said, oops, I forgot to tell you that and this is a change we'll make in the format, the form. We'll make sure that is always on there. But currently, Joel updated this today, and we currently have $2,178,199 in the roads fund. So we have we're healthy there, and this will, we won't be planning to use all of that this year, of course, but this will come out of that fund.
Question on that. So the roads fund that was in our report, and I know you may not be done, Callie, again, good question. The report had roads at 2.4. So this is 2.1 is to date, because in our packet on page 33, roads is 2.4 net usable cash. Well, it does say 1231. So that's 2.1 is a more updated number, Joel.
Yeah, that number that you have in your packet. So that's as of like kind of a snapshot in time as of January 31, 2021. And then the number that Glenn gave you, actually the updated number for roads. So basically, if kind of like I redid that cash spreadsheet right now, is so it'd be like $2.3 million for roads.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I guess
Yeah.
what I'm wondering is I haven't seen the budget, and it's probably out there somewhere where I can get it, but I haven't seen the budget, so I don't know how much of this fund has already been budgeted out for this year. So that's why I was curious.
Sure. The only thing, and Joel can speak to the past history, what all the projects that are still open, because we have a few of those. But we also, what we brought forward last time in the roads is the only thing, and then tonight are the only things that we have currently in the 2021 plan.
Okay.
Yeah, Joel, is there any backlog? I don't have that list up.
Well, like on that cash spreadsheet, so basically there's a line that says, and I'll point it out too when I do the financial statements, but there's a line that says obligated expenses. And you don't have to find it now. I'll show you where that is, like later on when we do the statements. But that basically has the amount that we're on the hook for, that the board has already approved through today, basically. So it basically treats it as though it's already earmarked and set aside for spending. And
So this isn't new. This isn't new request on top of what has been already approved.
yes, so whatever you approve tonight or the board approves, then would go on top of this obligated amount. So when I said about 2.3 million for roads, then if you went out and approved something for $1 million, then you could think that is then dropping it down to 1.3 million for future expenditures.
Anything else, Callie? Was that you're on mute?
I have more of a general question, and I know, Glenn, I know you've thought of this, but being an auditor, I just have to ask. So on the bids process,
Mhm.
Common practice, get at least 3 bids, and then, do the due diligence. I know in the past we've had trouble getting responses to bids, but I'm not even seeing that we went out for bids on this. And so I just want to make sure that these processes are being followed as we go down the road. So
Yeah,
that we're being
yes.
good stewards.
We haven't gone out to bid yet. As soon as we get this approved, I won't, we won't waste contractors' time. If we start doing that, we won't get many bids. So once we get it approved, Tyler will put it out for us. He has a long list of contractors that he sends things to. There are at least 9 of them. He will add anything that any contractor I ask him to. We'll also put it out there in a couple spots where contractors watch, so they would have a chance to participate as well. And then we'll bring it back. And a project this size is not too small. It's big enough to actually get a couple, so we should get 3 or 4 is my anticipation.
So this is more of the RFP rather than
Yeah, because
than approving the funds. This is actually approving the bids in a way.
You're approving the funds. The bids will be approved as part of the contract negotiation process that we take back later.
So to clarify that, we're approving the funds now, and then the staff will choose which bid to accept contingent on it being within the amount we allocate?
Correct. And we'll of course take the lowest bid that we get.
And
Just
in a
wanted-
normal process, because I know you said we have the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
In a normal process, we would say we have this job, we would go get the bids, and then you would select, the best one, and then come to us for the funds for that particular bid, right? That's the
No.
normal process.
No, actually, the normal best practice is in everything that I've done in capital funds, and I think, and this is what I'm going to recommend that we do, is we actually should have been having this discussion as part of your budget process last year. So we're not bringing surprises or extra projects. We're bringing your entire capital program, and we will do this for 2022. We'll bring the entire capital program that we're recommending forward. So now you are, as part of the budget process, you get to weigh in on whether it's valuable, what you feel about the project, all of those things. Then we won't waste Tyler's time, our money to pay him, and any contractor's time if it's a project that we don't value, right? And so that's the process that I recommend, because then when you get to this process later, you all know what the project is. We don't have to explain it. We've already gone over it. We've had a lot of questions asked, and the public knows what the projects are because our list is on our website and has been since the budget process.
But wasn't
So
this an
that's the
emergency project? Excuse me. Wasn't this an emergency project? So you can't plan for an emergency
Sure.
project in the budget, right?
Right, exactly, except this was probably, in this case, they may or may not have been able to fit it in the budget process. From what I understand, this emergency happened after
Right.
that. So you're right, this is an exception, but if you did it the way I described it in a normal condition, which our next one kind of fits more into that role, then you guys have, everyone has the information, and this becomes a, we could actually do it when we got the bids. So to your point, we could bring just the contract to you one time because we've already talked about the project. This emergency thing, I mean, I keep seeing different dates as to when it happened. So I don't want to put the date out there because I wasn't here. But when it depends on when it happened compared to the budget process. So you're absolutely right in this case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Questions?
Well, I would just add to that, that I guess I feel more comfortable in the case of an emergency request that's not been budgeted, that we approve the funds after we know what it's going to cost. So I'm not terribly comfortable approving it when we don't even know what the bids are. That's
well, I understand, but you approve this amount. I can't accept a bid that's higher than this, and we won't. We will come up with another approach, and that's why we have a little contingency. And this is based on, project estimations that I'm comfortable with, or I wouldn't have brought it forward. But to your point, that makes sense to me.
Waiting.
So is there such urgency that we can't get the bids then, to Callie's point? I mean, just to make
Yes.
everybody comfortable with the situation, there is such urgency
Yeah.
that we can't wait for
Yeah,
the
because
bids.
we can only do the work, this type of work in the open construction time, which is June to October. And now we have permits and everything, but we have to have time to bid this and make sure we got a contractor and get it scheduled and all of that. So we are on that timeline. Again, if we were doing normal projects, we want to plan ahead so we don't have to do it like this. But you're absolutely, yes, there is a timeline that is pressed against it, or we're going to go through another winter with it the way it is, and that's not very comfortable for us.
So is that the downside of us not approving this
Yep.
today is that we won't be in the process to be able to get bids in time for the work to begin over the summer, and we'll have to wait until next season to do this work.
We could. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but I will say that our challenge that puts it even deeper is that your next meeting, we have an anomaly that happens a couple of times every year. Your next meeting is the day before a board meeting. And so if we put it into the next meeting again and we wanted more information, then you wouldn't be approving until the beginning of May to move forward. So again, that's just facts. I want you guys to feel comfortable with whatever we're doing. So.
Are there more questions regarding this capital request? How are you all leaning as far as voting on? I mean, are we comfortable? Do we all feel like we need more information and more time? I feel like the information is there, and if we had more time, I don't know that we're going to get any more information other than, and with it being something that was an emergency. It was sometime last fall. For some reason, I remember it October, November-ish.
Yeah, that's what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm comfortable voting for it, just with the consideration that we're looking at the process and what the timing should be on these emergency type things, and that we see a final number. And I know it'll be in the financial statements, but when the bids are done, that we see a final number at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I can commit to bringing that to you before we give a notice to proceed. I can definitely notify you that. So you're absolutely.
Any other comments for this? Okay, so I am going to call to question on this request for $189,271.37, including tax allocation from the roads account, the long-term stabilization and asphalt repairs for Southern Courts as a result of the landslide. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. So we will move on to the next capital request, the capital roads request, culvert and vegetation control. That's 2021, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And we will, I'll have possibly a few comments, but I'm going to hand this to Jacob to take us through the process and the work plan.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacob Close. I'm the interim operations manager. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about a summertime work, or not summertime rather, but a seasonal operation that we've been doing for several years, maintaining culverts, cleaning along sides of roads, working on ditches, road mowing. It's described in there. I believe this all started in a memo from one of our from Larson Gross that I have dated December 29th. And my apologies, I did not get this memo into the packet for this. I will definitely get it added in, but December 29th, 2015, it was a memo from Larson Gross talking about the use of funds from capital roads funds to maintain culverts and ditches and kind of the limitations and how they saw it. And that would kind of form the basis for this vegetation control and the ditch work that we've gone forward with in since that time. And in the past, it's grown to include activities like Firewise. And it is not an insignificant amount of money, and it's some important tasks that happen in Sudden Valley. And obviously, conversations for the future, I'm sure will be how this is budgeted, and I'm sure there'll be discussions on whether it's capital and operations. And I'll leave that up to Glenn and the board to decide. But for right now, the way we had been planning to go forward was to operate this April through September. And those activities start with hiring staff and training them through operation of Firewise in our community, which some of you, depending on how long you've been in Sudden Valley, will recognize that terminology, but basically an operation where we try and reduce the fire load in our community, and we do pick up loads that are scheduled throughout. This provides a good time to train. The majority of these staff members are seasonal new hires that may not have worked for Sudden Valley ever before, or may not have done this type of work before. So provides a good period of time where we can train yet accomplish a good activity. So what I've gone through in the request is basically gone month by month and detailed the activities that are planned, and then also the costs that are associated with them. And this is a very extensive planning for the cost. This is all the costs. This is the fuel that goes in the machines, the labor, the overhead, employee taxes and whatnot, the PPE, supplies, mechanical repairs to wear items, flagging, contractors for activities that we can't do in-house, such as the 75-foot bucket truck work, rentals of equipment that we don't own, things of that nature. So it's kind of a long capital request, but it's broken up into months so that you can not only see what's planned and what our goals are, but also to kind of see what that costs us in the long over the scope of this project. And some of these activities are limited, being that Sudden Valley is in the Lake Whatcom watershed. Some of these activities are restricted to certain times of the year where we can only, over a certain amount, we wouldn't be able to conduct these activities, such as cleaning out ditches, and taking down the berms on the sides of the roads and things of that nature. So unfortunately, that's why these activities are timed during certain months. We don't really get to choose on those months. So anyway, I'll start with that. Any questions so far?
So before opening the floor up to questions, I'm gonna make the motion.
Okay.
The Finance Committee approves and recommends the Board of Directors approve a roads capital fund allocation not to exceed $220,673 to perform major maintenance of ditches, culverts, and swales in 2021.
Surprise. I have a question. My first one.
Okay, I need a second.
Oh, sorry about that. Second.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question. Floor is open for discussion.
Well, my first question is, why are only Jacob and I the only ones wearing green? Other than that.
Well, I do have green in my background for my Sudden Valley flag.
That's true.
I
Right.
have green eye.
So this may be in the memo, but my
Yes.
question is more around the accounting treatment. If we're pulling all of these costs out to capitalize them or take out of the capital fund, what happens to the expenses that are already recorded in the operating budget? So we're not double dipping, if you know what I mean.
So it sounds like, it sounds like I'm hearing, you're concerned that we might be having activities budgeted for in operations and in this capital activity. Is that what your concern is?
Right. If someone's a full-time employee and they're not working overtime and
Right.
their salaries are being allocated to this capital budget,
Mm-hmm.
they're still getting paid full-time in the operating budget. Is there some kind of treatment being?
Actually, I can answer that one.
Okay.
So basically, to address like the wages, because that's a good question, because we do have employees here, maintenance people, that they might work half their time on CVC and then the other half the time doing operation stuff. So we have separate codes in the HR module where they log their time that captures separately the work that they did for CVC capital and then the work that they did for operating. And then that's how we charge that time to both either operations or capital.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question is, so I understand that this has already been voted on at the SGM for 2016. So this is a continuing project, correct?
Yes, there was a vote in 2016 as to this kind of the setup that we went forward with.
And the language in that SGM said ongoing, so it wasn't an end period for it.
And then maybe I missed this, but who's the vendor? Because I always think it should be good to put the vendor in there. Do we have the vendor?
So the labor is supplied for this work via seasonal hires that we would hire through our, through HR and then train. We have in the past used 2 employees that were on staff and switched them from operations to capital for the period of time they're working in this operation to, like do the bucket truck work or what have you. But there'll definitely be at least one FTE that is a Sudden Valley full-time employee that will transition into this over the course of the project. There's been a lot of obviously turnover and kind of adjustments in the maintenance staffing, so it'll be heavily seasonal. But as far as a vendor, we do have a vendor for bucket truck use. There's a $30,000 amount in this that's budgeted per hour. That would be Earthworks Tree Service, which you might be familiar with from board discussions last week. Mm-hmm. And that is a new vendor based on issues we had over the last 2 years with another vendor. So Earthworks is the only contracted vendor that's part of this project. And they're not contracted. We would be soliciting them on a per hour basis for use of their bucket truck when needed, when ours doesn't fit. So there's actually no contract on that. It's just an agreed upon rate, which is actually covered in the agreement with the Earthworks.
From Earthworks that we worked on. And then I noticed in September, there's a missing number from your labor and taxes because I was going through here trying to add everything up.
All right.
So just update that. If you could update that.
September, let me get up
September's
there.
your labor and costs, you got 28,73, but in the previous month, the similar amount for labor and taxes was 26,613.
Oh, I'm missing you are correct. We're missing a digit there.
Yes.
And I can tell you from my Excel sheet here, let me clarify that really quick because we don't like incomplete information. So that's 28,073.
28,073. Okay.
My apologies.
No problem.
073.
I just like to add everything up, and then I get kind of squirrely when they don't.
Yes. No.
That's a big number.
No, it is, and just so all of you know, I don't take lightly, the amount here we're dealing with. But I, like Glenn talks about with being very transparent. I'm counting every hour of every activity. There's, this year there's benchmarks, if you will, on what we would accomplish each month, and so that you can hold, our department accountable. And myself accountable for the activities that we would hope to do. So X amount of road mowing and berm removal and working on basically getting deliverables for the amount of money you're spending, because it is not insignificant, and it is an investment. And I also understand, if it doesn't kind of match up to how you want to fund this activity this year, at least you can see month by month where if you had to make adjustments, how that would affect, and maybe what month we might not be able to afford as a community.
Gail. And unmute. You can hit your space bar on your computer is a really slick and quick, easy way to mute yourself and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I have a question for Jacob. I was active in the Sudden Valley governance, probably 4 years ago, and then I took quite a lengthy break from involvement. So I wondered, Jacob, I remember back, it was about 4 years ago, that the Valley spent, I think, a huge sum on a piece of equipment called the Super Sucker. It was supposed to go through the culverts, and just pick everything up. Do we still have that?
The capital purchase, I believe you're talking about, Gail. It's good to talk with you again after all these years. I knew you were out and about, but it's good to see you again. So we purchased a capital purchase was approved for a hydro excavator trailer. And that is a 4-inch hose on a suction line, if you think of a giant, drop back, if you will, and then a power washer type tip. Mostly that type of tool is used for cleaning out culverts and potholing, working around utilities. And that is a tool we would be using. We honestly probably use it every month in Sudden Valley. I think it's not the most efficient tool for cleaning out ditches on a wide scale, as a wide scale activity. Like our backhoe or an excavator digging those areas out. But the limitations of that are that we can only do that type of activity during the dirt work season and when utilities allow. And unfortunately, a lot of the utilities in Sudden Valley are run in the ditches. So that is part of this capital project, is using that tool that we purchased. Yes.
Well, I remember it was very costly. I'm glad that it's still being used.
Yeah, don't quote me on the price. I don't have that request in front of me. I believe that full cost was around $80,000, which over its lifespan, will be a pretty manageable amount per year in theory. But it was not insignificant.
So to clarify, the earthworks use of their equipment, that's under contractor costs in your proposal?
Yeah. So we have a bucket truck. Just a point of information in that we own, in Sudden Valley owns. It's a 2016. It's a 50-foot bucket truck. The reason we didn't go with a larger machine at the time was not only cost, but the larger bucket trucks require a CDL licensed staff member to drive them, and it just felt like it added more cost to the employees we would have to hire. And at that time, the decision was made not to go with that expensive of a unit and kind of have that restriction of CDL staff drivers. So looking at the request, as I'm just panning down here, I just want to make sure I answer this correctly. The bucket truck is the $7,500 contractor cost for a total of $30,000, not to exceed $30,000 over the course of the summer, and that's based on data from previous years and what we expect this year. It could be lower. We'll obviously try and use our truck as much as possible. Does that kind of the answer you were looking for?
So I have 2 questions. Looking at this big project, I appreciate how you outlined it by month with the individual cost. So that was helpful. Just ballpark, because I didn't ask this beforehand. Do you know what this project costed last year, so we can have some sort of comparison? If it's a similar range, or if it's lower, or how does it compare? Because you're talking to a group of people here who don't do these types of projects. We just mow our lawns on our property and it doesn't
Right.
cost $220,000.
Exactly. Yeah. So I might have to have Joel answer that on the specific number from
Yeah,
last
Jake,
year.
I can, sorry, I was muted. I tried to cut you off, but I
Okay.
tried to cut you off before you said something stupid, you know. I'm just kidding. Now, Kim, you wanted to know what it was last year?
Yeah, what's just a basis of comparison to what this type of work costs. I don't know if this is off. I don't know if it's high. I don't know if it's low. I don't know if it's just right. We're just getting some context for what this type of work costs on an annual basis. And then while Joel's digging around, maybe Jacob, you can answer my next question. What happens if we don't approve it? What's the worst? What's going to happen if we say, oh, we're just going to save this money? Or if we said, let's do every other month, but not every, just, throw it
I'll
out.
let Joel. Joel, are you ready with the number?
Yeah, so Kim, so last year for 2020, it was 164,600 approximately, basically.
So why did it go up so much?
Yes, perfect question, and I'll get into that next. So we looked at last year. We took last year as a benchmark of what was done, what's mentioned in that Larson Gross memo, what was approved in 2016, and what I found from our records and in doing the budget for this request is that things like road mowing were not happening. We were not removing the quantity of road berms, which is the buildup of soil, gravel, organic material on the edges of our roads that keeps the water from going down into the ditches. We were not keeping up on getting through a quantity that kept us from having flooding issues in the winter and all of that. So as I developed this scope for this year, I basically made it a goal to cover all of those activities at a level that would hopefully make everyone happy and get us through in a period of time so that when we're done, we aren't always behind, basically. So we're at a level that's a little bit more catch up to the amount of work we have. So this budget is based on doing all those activities and honestly doing more than last year. And I mean, the price reflects it. And costs do go up a little bit, but that doesn't explain the difference in the delta between last year and this year's spending. And most of that is expanded scope. So then you go to your second question, Kim, is at least as far as I heard it, what would happen if we don't do these activities? Or maybe, how would we, if we can't budget this amount, how do we make a way forward? And so in talking with Glenn, we realized that might be a possibility. So we're broken up by month. The easy way would just to be, to drop out maybe a month at the terminal ends. And we're going to do less, but we're going to spend less. That's a budgeting decision. And I hope next year we're ahead of this curve by several months. But as a finance committee and a board, I mean, if you were to say, well, we need to cut X number of dollars, I want to give you guys the best outcome we can, but maybe you cut September, to be honest. And that allows you to not drop any activity that we've planned for. We're still going to clean ditches. We're still going to remove berms. We're still going to trim back the vegetation so it doesn't hit trucks and vehicles, and clean culverts and mow roadsides. We just won't do as much.
So I'd like to.
How many residents in Sun Valley?
I'm sorry.
We're still looking for that exact number, but
I mean,
I've heard there's like 7,000.
Yeah, about 7,500.
Yeah. So, I mean, Kim, when you're talking about like, we just mow our own lawn, it doesn't cost us 200 and some thousand, but like it might cost us $30 each, which is like about what this amount is.
So also to add to that is that when you're talking about all of the activities that have been listed here, they all do impact stormwater. They all do impact water quality and how the ditches function. If the trees are dropping too many things in the way and trucks are hitting it, they break it off, it goes in the ditch, it stops it from working, gets it caught in culverts. So all of them are connected. I know one of the arguments is the operational argument, that some of this is operations. Well, I will tell you all of it is operations. The way that they decided to fund this is that's based on the memo, based on the information that was given before. It makes sense to me be trying to fund this, but to me, this is every place I've ever been, and my background is in maintenance and operations early in my career. This would all be funded as operational because it's all preventative in nature. But since we're funded this way, that's I compliment Jacob for being all inclusive, because the community will see the value, and to his point, it is a high number, and we talked at length about, do we put the whole thing in there or do we not? But we felt we wanted to give you a really good look at it and know that there's a backlog, and that once we get caught up, like Jacob says, the cost should have already started, rather than you have that ramp where it ramps up and then it should ramp down, because we're able to keep up with it, because we have such a backlog, not unlike the trees that we talked about last week at the board.
Yeah, and if you look at the history, I think there was a hope to really do more in some years, and Joel could provide you with numbers, but we, just to point it out, we literally some years didn't spend all of the money. And the unfortunate thing is these activities are never cheaper than they were in the past. And so money would roll over to another year. And I know that was frustrating to residents. It was frustrating to staff. Sometimes that was due to just challenging hiring situations. But we have to do our best, try and do our best every year and get caught up. And the unfortunate thing is with the culverts and the flooding and all that, overtime hours, into operations in the middle of winter when it affects someone's garage, that's very, that's not the way we want to operate. So, that's why we looked at this and tried to really cover all the bases for you in this coming year, and get more under control.
So this is a catch up. I mean, there's a small amount of money, but it's mostly catching up because of not doing the work in the past. And the money is there in the capital roads account, correct? And
Yeah, I can. So to give you a little background information, like the question was asked about the $164,000 that we spent in 2020 that was put into the 2020 budget. So I worked with Bruce with that in the previous year. And so we basically looked back at how much money was spent in the previous years out of CVC. And then, so the 164, so we actually basically carried over unspent portions that was kind of the plan to spend in the previous years that wasn't spent. And then 2020 was, you could think of it like a catch-up amount, yes, precisely. In terms of, so just to give you context, so that, so the amount for the CVC roads, that was, as we discussed previously, that was the 2016 SGM that was voted by the community. And it's, I believe it's $3.01 out of, so your roads portion that you pay each month, $3.01 goes specifically to CVC. And so just looking back in terms of going back to 26, so this started May 2016 when that portion started getting allocated or charged to residents and allocated for CVC. So going back to 2016 through basically, you could even say basically through beginning March. So we've collected about, and I'm looking at cash collections. I'm looking at what we actually, imputing what we actually took in, from residents, which is a little different from what was charged. So I'm kind of just looking at what was paid in to date. So it looks like we've taken in about approximately $536,000 for that CVC special assessment. And then we paid, going back to 2016, expenditures for CVC, approximately $527,000 for CVC. So fairly close to on target for what we've taken in versus what we've spent on it.
And the way we drive, to talk to our scope and kind of catch up, the way we'll know if we're catching up in a lot of ways is through the winter and the fall, the rainiest season of the year, fall through spring. If we're not receiving the calls, each day, and the emails and the situations of poor drainage, and in all honesty, those road berms are keeping water on your roadways, which then, during freeze and thaw breaks down the asphalt surface along on the edge of your asphalt. And, in the end, that's going to cost you paving, dollars. So that's how we derive a little bit of the scope, is when we see those drainage issues, those calls coming in. And then also, we're monitoring pavement edges as we sweep, as we continue to see those issues of buildup there and water staying on. I'm sure you could all give me a location where you drive and the water stays there, Jake, and it's annoying, and that's causing issues on your road, breakdowns of that pavement right up against the shoulder. That's what's going to drive us having to keep spending, because as Glenn can talk to you about, when we get to a roads repair, I mean, the costs every year just are hard to absorb, how much it costs to repave a mile of road these days, and especially when you add in watershed considerations. So, but it is a big number.
Thank you.
So my question is, so we're playing catch up. So we're not being shy with these numbers, Jacob. I mean, is there any anticipation that, this may not really get us to being caught up?
No, I guess I'll clarify on your time period for being caught up. We are not going to get through 40 lane miles of shoulder berms this year, but the scope and the goals are laid out in what we hope to accomplish this year, and next year when we plan for 2022, that number will adjust. I would say, I'm thinking you've got a couple years of catch up probably to do where you're spending at this level. It's not like we'd be committing to 10 years at this level, but I mean, you really have to kind of see how you go through the winter, see what your, people like Tyler and Glenn, when they're recommending activities to try and preserve our roads, which everyone needs, everyone wants, and we don't want to have to replace those earlier than possible. You're going to have to each year kind of assess, then create scope for the following year, and plan for that and budget for it. So I think you've got probably a few years of this level of spending, in all honesty, before we would pare down. But I'll be honest with you, it's going to be a year by year to really see how the trend goes on flooding calls, drainage issues, pavement issues. I think we're getting caught up more in the trees and the vegetation on the edges of the roads. Where we are lacking is the berms that are created on the side of the roads, the ditch clean outs. Those are the two areas where we're lacking, and this level of spending will catch us up more in the next year, 2 and 3, to where we won't have as many issues.
Appreciate that extra information, because I was under the impression that this approval would get us caught up, but now, okay, maybe 2 or 3 years. And honestly, the shocking part to me is, like, this is $56,000 more than last spent, and you're spending $56,000 more dollars.
Yeah,
but you're not caught up. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm like,
I think if you look at the total value of your roads in Sudden Valley, if you look at the total value of your, if you had to reconstruct every drainage swale on the side of the road and the culverts that we are clearing out, if you suddenly have to rebuild or, build those from new, the number is even more alarming. Glenn can speak to those numbers because he's used to that.
so it's pay now or pay later, right?
That's
It's
it. And
Pay
and
now
I think,
or pay later.
yeah. So as
Well,
an example, go ahead.
Actually, to get a little more precise on pay now versus pay later, some types of maintenance mean that you're making future maintenance cheaper, and some types don't have that property. How do you think about like the long-term costs here? Like, to give one example, I know, for instance, subway systems, if you leave them too long, the repairs don't just get more expensive proportional to the amount of time, it's much, much more. Is this something like that, or is this the kind of thing where you can put it off longer without too much of a consequence on the total cost?
I would defer a little bit to Glenn on that. When I look at when I'm talking about like the berms on the edge of the road, I mean, if we really wanted to get the full life of pavement and roads in Sudden Valley, I mean, you'd honestly be looking at a proposal for me to do every mile graded off like the county does in a large scale operation and be very invasive. It would not be $200,000. But we're dealing with budgets and accounts. So, I mean, Glenn can talk to what he thinks that, the idea would be, I guess, better than I could.
Okay, so as an example, the berms on the side of the road, the way that's all build up over, probably based on what Jacob and I have seen, probably decades of not doing it in a lot of places. So when you peel it down, even if you're doing it on a full preventative program, you're going to do it at the most probably every 5 years. So to your point, it does get cheaper once you catch up in that example. Same thing with ditches in general. If you're managing them, they don't plug up drains, they don't plug up culverts. Culverts get damaged when they get plugged up because branches get in them and all that sort of stuff. And water will find a way. So when it'll bypass them, it'll actually punch holes in pipe if it's backing up and not working properly and you're not cleaned properly. So it's exactly what happens. As an example, I'm going to here in the next couple of meetings, I will bring back a stormwater culvert request, and it's a culvert replacement. And for one, and it's not a small one, but it's typical of what we'll see in our project list. It's $315,000 to do one culvert replacement. So when you start looking at your preventative dollars, and we're just talking about culverts, if you're talking about the roadway, a mile of pavement gets more expensive every year. And in addition to patch it right, because we're in the lake basin, we have to mitigate if we do so much patching work, if we go into the base of the road. So we have to pay to mitigate plus to overlay. So our costs are astronomical. So which are higher than they would be in other parts of the county because they're not in the lake district. So that to me, your point, you're right on, that it does get, the maintenance as you put it off does cause more capital costs in the end, and your maintenance continues to be higher. It'll cost more next year for us to do this work. And if we have to catch up all at once for some reason, which federal environmental regulations can require some of that as we move forward, then we're trying to catch up at once. So having a couple of year plan, I would agree with Jacob. We'll be able to evaluate year to year and be able to really narrow the program down to be preventative. And that's the plan, is if we can get it down to a measurable thing and get it down more to where it started, which I believe you can if you do this over a short period of time.
Thank you, Glenn. Any more questions? How's everyone feeling about the number? Are we ready to take a vote, or maybe we could, our options are to approve it, our options are to take a month off, of the spending, like Jacob said, well, we could say, well, we'll do everything but September and just add it on the next year, or we can just, bite the bullet and start trying to catch up. Yes, Gail. And unmute, hit your space bar.
Okay. One limitation I have, and maybe some of the other newcomers to the finance have, is an understanding of the budget as a whole. In other words, if we approve this, are we really then pushing out a decision we'd have to make later about something that would seem equally urgent and important? I don't know that I'm not asking for an answer right now. I'm just saying that informs my, I'd love to say, I remember, you know, there are so many committees and long range planning and this and that, but the community has always said roads are number one. I mean, if we can't get to our house, we don't care about anything else. We have to be able to get there, you know. So I tend to say, let's go for it, you know, let's do what we have to do. But I don't know, Jacob has the advantage of being early in our cycle, right? So people come now will say, sure, let's just spend the money. And then what happens in July or August, right? Have we spent the money? Have we spent it all? So that's just a
Well, I'll put a little plug in. This is why, the more time we can invest into capital budgeting, whether it be in roads, which this is out of roads, and I think we've talked about the amount that's in there, currently. And, I spoke with Glenn, and he is in touch with our contracting on roads and how many culverts we're going to have to do. And I think he's confident that this won't put us in a bad position later on in the year. But by all means, Gail, I mean, as much planning as we can do for the year coming as far as capital to set, levels we don't, balances we don't want to drop below, and maybe get those numbers from me as early as you can and from Glenn as early as we can. And those discussions are a great idea.
Yeah. So, and to that point, as we move into the next year's budget process, which, by the way, staff is already beginning that process. One of the things that I'm going to recommend is that we do some updated planning for our roads capital. The last time it was updated was 2014, and it wasn't based on a roads rating process done by an engineer. And I'm going to recommend that you do that in 2022. And if you do planning in 22, then you can implement in 23, which means that gives us the opportunity to be confident that we can spend this money and not impact a project, at least for this year and next year as well. And then you'll know where you are. You'll have a really good measurement. You'll be able to hold us accountable by these goals for the next 2 years, and then start to evaluate what's the best road projects we should be doing versus maintenance, and you can start to balance it much better. So to your point, that's why I'm confident about it, is I believe you're in that replanning stage. To be able to make this up right now is probably the best time.
Thank you, Glenn. Any more questions or comments? That was a good point, Gail, that you raised, that, the community roads is very important to our community. When we did the long range planning survey, that roads was a big part of it, making sure that people can get to and from work, particularly in snowstorms and other issues with, but the snow event's separate, but just making sure that we can get to work and getting rid of the potholes and things like that we see. So any other comments before I call to question a vote? Okay. Well, I'm going to call to question a vote for the Finance Committee to approve and recommend the Board of Directors approve a roads capital fund allocation not to exceed $220,673 to perform major maintenance of ditches, culverts, and swales in 2021. Do I have a second?
A second.
All in favor? That's unanimous. Any opposed? Of course, not if you're unanimous. Okay, then the motion is approved. Thank you, everybody, for that discussion. Next is pool repairs.
Yeah, I'll take this one on as well. So with rec starting up and restrictions easing to some extent, the pools startup for this year becomes a focus of the recreation department. There is some preventative maintenance that's done every year. We were able to skip that last year, and in fact, the covers that were installed years ago as a capital item have remained on and have really preserved the pools. So that was a great investment. But one of the things we knew we needed to do last year, and we didn't end up having to spend the money, was this some work in the pool to replace filters and some filtering media, clean and service the water heaters that were purchased through a capital replacement several years ago. And then we had a failed chemical controller, which meters out the product into the water as the water is filtrated. So this work needs to be done if the pools are going to open this year, and if the county is who allows us to open our pools through inspections. These things will have to be done, before they'll sign off. And so I brought this forward to you guys so that you can take a look at it. The earlier, the better that we can get going, because when you're on a time crunch, you end up spending more money just to expedite things and make people more available. So Sesco has been our contractor for the work we can't do ourselves, and they're really experts in our pool system since we renovated several years ago. And so that's who this bid is from, and they generally do the contracted work on our pools. They're a trusted ally for us there. So as we've talked about a little bit tonight, there is not 3 bids for the service. I requested quotes from a couple other companies in the greater Whatcom County area, and I heard back from one, we'll try and get time to come out and look. And basically, they're just not dedicated to working with Sudden Valley. They aren't on the scale that Sesco is. So there is only 1 bid for this work. So that is what it is. I did request extra quotes. And it kind of goes to that fact of there's just some contractors that won't have time or choose not to bid. We'd probably have to get down to, Everett South to get some larger scale companies that do institutional pool maintenance involved. And then a lot of them know they won't be competitive because they've got to drive farther north. So that's a little bit of background there, but it's pretty simple maintenance activity for pools. And it's dictated in the funding memo, and then also the attached request. So there you go.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. So I will make a motion to open up discussion. So the motion is a recommendation of the Finance Committee to approve and recommend the Board of Directors approve a SURF allocation of $5,711.18 for service work to the Sudden Valley pools.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Gail. And any questions or discussion?
What would happen in the event that we don't open our pools?
Yeah, it's just a matter of, what the community is looking for.
I mean, are they, if they were ready, would they be allowed to be open right now?
Pools?
Yeah.
So even last year, there were private pools such as ours open with reduced staffing or reduced operation or occupancy numbers. And last year, the decision was made that those didn't, the trade-off was it would be so expensive to maintain and so few residents of Sudden Valley could use the resource that it was not worth going through the startup costs and all that. For example, the pool at the private pool at Bellingham Country Club was open. I visited at one point when I was out there on the golf grounds, and it was open, but it was like 4 people. pretty tough numbers to justify. But this year, with the expanding numbers going to 50% occupancy and reservation systems, the Y pool inside and Everett is open, and numerous others will follow a similar process. I imagine ours would be open, but that's as a maintenance in maintenance and operations, I have to assume that they will be open unless there's a decision maybe from the board or the Parks and Trails Committee otherwise.
I swim at the Arn Handy 3 times a week. So, I mean, there are pools that are open right now. They do have limited occupancy, but there are certainly pools open. Yeah. Safer to swim pools. The chlorine kills the COVID. Seriously, the chlorine kills the COVID.
Well, and that was my question, Jacob, with us going into stage 3, 50% occupancy. Are we cost effective at that point to open at 50% occupancy?
You're asking me whether pools are cost effective. I don't know.
Well,
pools are a very expensive item, and I love it. I have a reservation with my daughters for Friday, to keep them, keep them learning how to swim. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of residents, from what I've heard, would like them to be open this summer.
No, you misunderstand my question.
No.
It's not, would people like it to be open? The question is, at 50% occupancy, are we making money or are we losing money? Is it cost effective for it to be open?
So I can answer that.
Let's put the pool open.
The pool will never make money, and I don't think breaks even, because the costs it is hard anyway, even if we were at 100% occupancy. But I would say there is a magic number where we say operating becomes ineffective. I think at 50%, we're starting to get into the discussion where we should consider opening. We want to be ready and anticipate that we probably will be at a higher range. It's likely, let's put it that way, that we would be at a higher range by summertime, by June, July. So we will constantly monitor that number, and Sam, our rec manager, and Jacob will continually be evaluating that and providing me the information to be able to decide when the best moment is. But I'd say we're getting close.
All right, thank you.
So, I mean, the other question I have, so since the maintenance was put off last year, it sounds like, isn't there a point where you really have to do it, whether there's people swimming or not, to sort of keep it functional?
With these items, we're not filtering the water right now. It would be a good question. I'd have to ask I'd kind of defer to our pool contractor how much we'd be trading off by not doing this work right now and keeping the filters in good shape. I would estimate that after that water has sat there for that long, we would need to start circulating and filter to maintain. We check that. Our contractor comes out from Sesco, Dennis, and has been checking the water. We've checked water quality and clarity, and it's been put into kind of a mothballed mode until we're ready to open. So we put some effort in there, but at some point you're gonna have to spend these costs when you open regardless. Whether it needs to happen to prevent any damage or extra costs, I'm not totally aware of that, if that's true or not.
And my question is, the maintenance that we deferred and didn't spend money on last year, what happened to that money? Did we save it for this year, or did it get swallowed up and then now we're asking for new money?
Right. So the operations money for the Parks and Rec ballot measure that was approved by residents stayed in an account. Joel has all those numbers for you. That was operational money. This is due to the way capital expenditures are described in our bylaws, the term that the period of time they last, and what sort of spending. This is a capital request until those parameters change. So the capital, we would have had to spend this money in capital last year, so that's in the CRRF account. In theory, if we had opened last year. The money is not an operational amount of money or an operations account. It's a capital expenditure. So the money though from the rec measure is still, lump sum waiting there. And we did have a surplus because we didn't operate a lot of rec functions last year. Joe would have those numbers.
Any other questions on this capital request? Okay, well, I will call to question and make a motion that the Finance Committee approve and recommend the Board of Directors approve a SURF Fund CRRF allocation of $5,711.18 for service work on the pools. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, it is approved by acclamation. Thank you all. Next on our fourth capital request is for sander replacement.
Yes, and that's me yet again. Hopefully last time you'll hear from me tonight. Probably already tired of me. So during our last snowstorm, and as detailed in the description there, we had a failure of the tub of one of our sanders. It was a poly unit, so it's a giant plastic tub that holds the sand and salt that's spread on the roads to provide traction after we snowplow. And that developed a large crack in it, and it is not salvageable. The part isn't. And unfortunately, that part is no longer offered. It's been discontinued. There's a newer design. And so we can't, order a new tub. I did include in the quote, they included some of that pricing had it been available, but basically we're at the point where we need to buy a new one, a replacement one. And that's what's quoted in there. And it is a single brand that matches the controls and all the other sanders there. It would cost you, probably at least $1,200 to maybe a little bit more to go to a different brand. And we'd had one off brand. It is a competitive quote for that item. But basically it's a failure from one of our snowstorms and kind of the cost of snowplow operations.
Any questions on the floor for Jacob on this one? Seems pretty straightforward.
And I will say that we will be going to a stainless steel version with this one, which allows us to send it out for repair in the future. Has the same corrosion resistance that plastic would allow, but it would allow us to next time have this welded up and not have this problem. And this is the type of sander we put it on our newest trucks. So kind of, we shouldn't have this scenario again.
Okay, any other questions for Jacob? So I will now call for a vote that requesting $6,930, including tax and 5% contingency allocation from the SURF account for purchase of a replacement road sand spreader. All in favor? Okay, so we have Jean left early for a meeting, so it is unanimous with the remaining Finance Committee members. And so it is approved. Thank you, Jacob. And that completes our capital request. Next on the agenda, we move to continuing business, of which there are no items. So now I will move us on to new business. And the first of that is the PPP loan draft spending plan. Who do I hand the floor over to? Is that you, Glenn? Or
Yeah, come to me first, and I'm going to hand it off to Joel.
All right.
So he needs to come back. But before I do that, to give him a minute, I want to thank you guys for the approvals of the capital request. We do not take the amounts or your trust lightly, and we will come through for you and keep reporting back to you on that. So since Joel's not here, I'm gonna take a swing at it and some of the questions he might need to answer. The the request was made to come back with the, what we were doing with the PPP loan, the 3P loan, and give you some background on it. So Joel wrote the staff report, and it is a payroll protection plan loan, and so it's meant to protect your payroll, which is what we have in place. Because of turnover and a number of other things, we have some good news on our payroll, at least at this point. However, ramping back up out of COVID, we will have some needs there. So what Joel highlighted though was also what the criteria was to get forgiveness of the loan. And I think that's a key factor in this, is that we have to meet certain criteria to be able to get forgiveness. And I think it's September 21 that we have until then to meet those criteria and provide the report to the federal government. So what ends up happening is we hold on to those and the funds, and we use it to protect our payroll. And then if we don't expend any of it, it becomes some of our it goes into our income statement. So I'll try and answer any questions, and hopefully we can get Joel back here and help me out. But
can you clarify what the criteria was to get the loan?
That's a good question. I think it's I know when Joel and I talked about it, I know we met the criteria because when we applied, in order to get it, we had to meet the basic criteria, but I don't know what specifically they were.
It's my understanding that companies or organizations or whoever got the loan had to attest and just say that the money was necessary for them to continue their current operations. Mm-hmm. I guess that's where my concern is, like, was it really necessary?
Sure. I think when they asked for it, based on what I understand, and we also the board waived fees at least 1 month last year. So at the time they applied for it, they didn't know whether they would do that again. And I think that is a factor to why the decision was made to go for the loan and how you could meet the criteria. Again, there's
absolutely. I think there was some language about, like, in this uncertain time, something like that. I guess I'm just now wondering, like, now that we're into it and we look back, we can decide, was it necessary, how much was necessary, and make decisions accordingly.
I think you're right. And Joel, the question was about criteria for the 3P loan.
For the PPP loan?
To actually get it. What were some of the key criteria that we had to talk about to get the loan?
Just going to scroll right to my memo. Did you see the memo also in the finance packet? So basically, the criteria for the PPP loan is all based off of, it was 2.5 times eligible average monthly costs for the fiscal year 2019, meaning payroll costs. So it looks at all payroll that's $100,000 or less. So once someone's payroll goes over 100 grand, which would only be the GM in this case, then it would be blind to it, so to speak. So just for that portion. So basically all of 2019 average monthly payroll, 2.5 times of that is what came up with the $357,700 that we were awarded for the PPP loan.
So Joel, it was my understanding that we had to attest that it was necessary to continue our operations.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, like with the PPP loan, that's kind of a default thing in terms of everyone who applies for it is basically, it's going to be awarded. For us, the main thing, because at the time, keep in mind, when we applied for the PPP loan, everything was uncertain to everyone at that point. So That's so that's why it's basically they're really looking at the big determining factor is your average monthly payroll cost during the period for us 2019. And then the forgiveness portion of it is also based off of, well, it's just based on it's a calculation for our FTEs that we incurred during our performance period. So our period, you could either select 8 weeks or 24 weeks. We'll go with the 24 weeks. So that runs from May until approximately November 2020. And then we have until September 2021 to submit the application for forgiveness.
So when we're looking at the numbers and what we decide to do about it, my concern is not the eligibility for it and like the technical kind of, can we do this? My concern is the ethics of it. And so I'd be really interested to see like what money we actually lost and, kind of justify that this was actually necessary for us to continue our operations rather than just like, well, we're eligible, so let's take it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, from our perspective, or I guess my perspective in accounting, the one thing that I'm looking at is whether or not we're entitled to it. We can get it legally, which we did. We had to submit a tremendous amount of paperwork to them for this PPP loan. So it wasn't just one form. It was, quarterly reports, payroll reports, the whole 9 yards.
Right. And you might have heard in the news recently that like there was a lot of issues with equity in the distribution of the PPP loans nationwide. And really people that had the capacity to fill out all those papers, were the people that were getting it, which were more affluent people in general. So I think that's a big issue, that they're trying to sort out now, but that's, I think, also where the ethics of it comes in for me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
oh, go ahead.
if I can step in there, that I think the purpose of it, and I think we're going backwards, but the purpose of my understanding of it is to protect your payroll so you could keep people on without laying them off. And to your point, the program was not done very well, and which is not atypical of government trying to solve a problem quickly. They're not designed to do that. So so to your point, I think there's people who have given the money back. That is certainly an option that the board could consider, because technically we have it in an account. We haven't spent that money, but it's also still an insurance policy, because while we feel like it's moving in the right direction, we don't know. It could change on us in a 6-week period and we could be in a bad spot. So I think that's the thing to consider at this point. I understand, I definitely get your point about the more affluent communities and stuff, but I would also say that many of our employees that we would be protecting with this don't fit into the category that you're talking about, the folks that aren't as affluent. So
right, but we would possibly employ them whether we had the money or not. That's where the affluence comes in.
It's a possibility, yes,
right.
But it's also
more
possibility.
Information needed.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Fair enough.
Any other questions on that? Go ahead, Callie, and then Gail.
So when it comes to the forgiveness, it's, we have to put an application in for the forgiveness of the loan. And I guess I would be concerned if it's not forgived and we don't give it back, then we have to pay it back one way or another. Are there any penalties if we don't meet certain criteria? Is it subject to audit? Or is it one of those things where we can apply and either say yes or no, and it's kind of, whatever happens?
Basically, this is how it would work. Once we apply for forgiveness, we'll just assume worst case scenario, they say, we're not forgiving you anything. Then basically at that point, it's a loan at 1% interest, going back to when we first got it in May. And then at that point, we could say, well, fine, we'll just give it all back to you, and then the loan's done, like at that point. Or we could still keep it and say, fine, that's 1% is better than than what we're paying on the surf loan right now.
Okay. But I'm just, typically the government, if you apply for something or receive money that you theoretically didn't deserve or weren't eligible for, then they'll penalize you somehow and they'll make it hurt. So I was just concerned about that part.
Yeah, with this in terms of like how the loan is going to be based off of, like I mentioned before, FTEs. I won't get too much into like the criteria for FTEs, but basically it's looking at what our FTEs or were during the performance period. In our case, May to November in that case. And there are like a couple different options that we could choose FTE wise to make it as beneficial as possible to us for the calculation. And then we compare that to like a reference period. And there's a couple different reference periods that we could choose, like between, for example, like February and June of 2019 or January and February. And so then at that point, then it looks back at the FTEs. And then let's just say that, I'll just make it simple. Let's just say we had 10 FTEs, which obviously we have more than that, but I'm just making this real easy to see. We have 10 FTEs in our performance period. And then if we go back and look at what were the reference FTEs in the reference, we had 9 in the performance period and then 10 during the reference period. So then they'd say, well, sorry, now we'll only forgive 90% of the loan. That's essentially what it would come down to. So then at that point, 90% would be forgiven, and then 10%, well, this is a 1% interest loan now for that 10% difference is how it would look. And that's basically that's really where the penalty would come into. It would be the FTE penalty, so to speak, on the forgiveness portion of it.
Gail?
Yeah, I studied the PPP a bit because I'm doing taxes right now. And I only wanted to say a couple of things. My understanding, I haven't done a tax return involving it yet, in part because they're still reconciling, but that you will get, the forgiveness involves about 75% of your payroll, basically.
Yeah, I think.
And then you have another 25% that you could have used for rent or, business equipment. Basically, it was an attempt to keep people afloat. And to Kara's point, I think what happened this, last spring and over the summer is the government was not fine-tuning these things. They, as we know, they were massively just throwing money into the economy to keep the economy from just stalling out. And so I don't see this as a really social justice issue. I mean, we know that, some people are better at numbers and that kind of thing than others, but I don't know that this is the place where we need to turn that money back because we're unethical in accepting it. That would be my view. I just thought I'd put it in there. In other words, we're complying with the terms, assuming that we do, or that we have, that we do comply when the time comes, and that's that. It's like many things in life. Sometimes you just follow the rules and you get the outcome that the rules provide for you. And on the social part of people, low-income people who need help and et cetera, I just think the forum for addressing that is not this PPP program. That's my view.
Okay, thank you. I have a question, Joel. Is that income taxable?
No, you mean the forgiveness portion of it? The forgiveness portion is not taxable, no. Meaning like, yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. So that's the part that I didn't talk about. So when now we'll assume the whole thing becomes forgiven, that $357,700. So you're probably wondering, well, what does that look like on the income statement? So basically at that point, then I'll point out, when I get to the income statements, I'll point out that liability section again on the balance sheet, the PPP loan. Then that liability essentially goes away. And then we would have a gain on our income statement. It would be called debt extinguishment, gain from debt extinguishment of $357,700. So it's basically like a shot in the arm, so to speak, to the operations segment of our income statement. It's almost like we got another $357,700 in extra dues money, that fell in our lap, so to speak, on the 2021 income statement.
But it would be taxable then if it's given.
No, it would not be taxable.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Will we see the loan for?
Anyways.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I said, it won't be taxable, and we're also a nonprofit 501c4 as
Gotcha.
well.
Will we see the loan forgiveness application before you submit it?
I hadn't actually thought that far ahead yet on that. That's a good question. I don't know.
Sounds like a request to be.
I would
If
like
you-
to, yeah.
If you want to, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Any other questions on the Ppp loan spending plan? All right, we'll move on to the credit card policy update. Who is going to take the floor on that one? Glenn, all right.
That'd be me. So I was looking at the packet and this was brought up. We have a more updated version of this, and I've been trying to find it and haven't found it. So I want to go over it, and if you're not comfortable, I will gladly bring it back to you again for future consideration, because the packet update it's similar information, but as I look at it, we had changed the officers, and when I saw that, I'm like, I know we changed those. And I will tell you, some of these forms that we have, when you put them in a PDF, they do some wacky things, and I'm pretty sure that's what happened in this one. So because we have a list of 5 account holders, there are 2 others that are listed there. Joel should be listed, as well as I'm looking at the list. For sure, Joel should be at a 3,000, and then we had one other who was there. So again, I'll walk through kind of this. This is this has been a process, a policy where each time, I don't know if they've done it annually, but each time they add people to credit cards, they set a policy document so that we have it on record for the bank, so that they understand, okay, this is a policy document. We have the direction to actually have these credit cards. It's an accountability piece also for all of us. We do use credit cards quite a lot in purchasing. It allows us to be flexible. One of the questions that comes up regularly is, what about, this allows us to purchase on Amazon accounts, which is not a comfortable thing for me because it's not as controllable as other things. So, but we do need to have certain people have them. So as an example, the department heads, which is Joel, Jacob, Brian, Rachel, and Sam, they all have needs that they need occasionally to purchase things. And so, like for Rec as an example, we hope to have a number of events and things happening here pretty soon, and he's going to have to get supplies to pull those off. Susie's on the list example. She's the ACC coordinator, and she's buying tree permits and working with the county on a number of permitting issues. So we need to have that flexibility to do these quick purchase, timely purchases. The other thing that changes we were already making is we're trying to put everything on account we can. So as an example, we're moving all of our purchases of office supplies to work with Office Depot or one of those accounts, and buying in bulk rather than in piecemeal off of Amazon. Because in piecemeal, it might be cheaper if you're doing it that way for Amazon, but if you're doing it bulk with Office Depot, it's not. So we're working towards that. But in order to operate, we need to do that as well. Like as an example, you'll see the Jacob and Brian are higher. They tend to purchase more of this in this way. And for Jacob in particular, when you're running maintenance, you need emergency responses to be able to call somebody and say, hey, deliver the sand, deliver the de-icer. So that's why they're a little bit higher. So we just followed the policy, the association corporate credit card policy. One of the things that I don't think is in here, which is I'm going to I think what I'm going to recommend is, while our team really wants this to happen, and so do I for efficiency, what I'm going to do is go over, answer your questions, and then I'm going to bring back the updated one at the next meeting. I think that's the only fair way to do this. But one of the things that we wanted to change, and that's why I made the point, because it's not in this version, is we'd like to be able to have our finance manager be able to cancel credit cards and to re-up them. And of course, we've had a lot of staff turnover, and one of these staff turns over, we need to cancel it immediately for our own protection. And we were not able to do that in this last process because we hadn't gone through this. So if we clarify the process that way, so we can have that flexibility. And of course, that's not everybody. That's just our person who's responsible for our finances, which is Joel, who can take care of that. And then we could better manage those. We can better manage our credit pieces that are happening. We have more flexibility to manage our day-to-day purchasing. And of course, as you know, our purchasing policy, and maybe you all don't know, but your purchasing policy actually has gone to the document review committee to make some edits, and it will come to you next as a group when they're done with their recommendations to evaluate. And that this is a part of that we're the credit limits are still, the purchasing is still under all of our base policy. So you can't, the 2,500 rule and all of those other rules are still there as these purchasing. So, like I said, I'm not gonna ask you to vote on this. I just want to be able to answer your questions and get any input. So as we bring the final version to you, we can clean it up and make sure we meet those needs. So,
Glenn, thanks for sharing that. I noticed what looked like 2 mistakes to me, and I wanted to see, first of all, are these mistakes or did I misread? And second of all, if they are, whether the new version accounts for these.
sure.
The first thing I noticed is a very small point. Somewhere in the language of the policy, it mentioned 6 accounts, but I saw a list of 7, only 5 of which had names attached. So presumably all those numbers should converge at some point.
They do in the new version. Absolutely.
Cool. And then the other one I noticed was in the language, it says that accounts should have credit limits of no more than $6,500, but both 2 of the accounts on there do.
Yes, and the language will change to, I believe we're going to change it to 10,000 as a max. But either way, we're either going to word it that way or we'll say 6,500 with the exception of these 2 parts of the operation.
Yep, makes sense.
And we also, that's why I noticed too, is we also put the people's positions in there so that you know which positions are actually responsible for them. And so if we make a change, so one of them leaves or promotes or whatever, then that position would be given the credit card and Joel can control that and then we can report it back to you. So.
Cool, thanks for sharing. And
Yep.
One other question about the policy. I don't know if this belongs in this policy or somewhere else, but what are we doing to kind of maximize things like cash back or rewards we get from these? Because I know certainly some companies that can add up to a fair bit.
Sure. I think that's definitely a thing we need to talk to our bank about is what are we getting? Can we get those? I think that's a great point. And then we can use them for better deals on purchasing. Absolutely.
By the way, the cards we use are through the WeCube Bank and they give us 1%. They give us a credit basically at the end of every year for 1% of the purchases.
Thank you, Joel.
Go ahead, Gail.
My only question to Glenn or Joel is, of the people on this list, who currently have cards? All of these people currently have cards at these amounts?
So basically the active managers here right now who have cards would just be Jake, Brian, and
That's it.
that might be it. Yeah,
That's it. Yep.
The other people are new employees.
that's right. Yeah, like Rachel hasn't been assigned a card yet.
Mm-hmm. And I was present when the credit card policy was adopted, that is when staff started getting the cards, and the amounts were a lot lower. How do you determine the dollar limit?
For me, it's based on experience. We can look back and see when their purchases are, but it's more about making sure that they can make the purchases they need. Like for Jacob, if you're looking at to be able to get a down payment on de-icer or rental equipment or things like that, his number needs to be that. And we don't want his card to run out if he's done a couple. As an example, for Susie, the 3,000, we know that the permits don't cost that much. But we want to make sure that when we cycle through them, if she does 10 tree permits and some other permits, that she doesn't run out of money. But that's what they were based on. And that's why you see there's only a couple of different levels. There's only 3 levels to them, because it's just based on those things.
Glenn, I know that you're interim right now, but you say you'll replace these names with positions. Is that correct in the forthcoming update? I think that the general manager would also be someone who would have a card.
I think you're right. The full-time general manager should. The interim in this case won't.
No, that's fine. I mean, I appreciate the straightforward. So we won't have names exactly. We'll have positions, maybe followed by the current holder of that position.
Absolutely, that's exactly right.
Go ahead, Callie. Great questions, Gail.
So, an internal control perspective, it's very, it's not exactly best practice to have people have credit cards, because there are reasons you have to, and I understand emergency purposes and you need to have some flexibility in some cases, but it's also a good way to circumvent the pre-approval process and the bid process. And so I think I'm really interested to see the purchasing policy to see if it accounts for those types of things. And if these limits are reasonable and the reasoning behind having these credit cards is reasonable, what types of circumstances that would apply to. So I just wanted to make that comment.
I think to that point, almost all of these purchases are materials and supplies that are done through the credit cards. And I agree with you that it is a challenge, which is I think one of the things we're doing is tightening them up, because what ends up happening is if the right people don't have them and they need something, then the process is bypassed even further, because people try to find a way to get the work done. And that has happened here, and it's happened everywhere that I've been. And if a manager has one and they're responsible, that's part of their responsibility, and we give some of that responsibility to others. But absolutely, the purchasing policy is the overarching governing policy.
But to Callie's point, those things that are purchased with the cards, those are operational, right? So they wouldn't go to the committee anyway, right?
Very true. They would be approved and talked about in your budget process, yes.
And but there's a point of information. We had a snowstorm several years ago, which actually was one of the reasons my limit got increased. And we went through a period of time where our inventories just were run out. We can't store enough for 7 days. And our vendors that we had accounts with, there were like 3 of them, they ran out, and we didn't have access to literally road sand and different things like that, and chains and some stuff. And so we had to really start expanding out. And when you have those scenarios, you have to be able to spend, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 at a time. And it's rare that I know for myself that I spend that, maybe once or twice a year that the statement has that. But it's really those scenarios that we're looking at, or it's not run of the mill daily. I think, we're going to run up $10,000 on a credit card this month. It's pretty rare, at least in my case.
And I think that speaks exactly to my point. I mean, it should be the exception if you're not going through the regular process. So, thank you.
And by the way, too, the credit cards, when the credit cards are paid, those go through the normal AP process. So the check signers will see all the credit card statements, just like they would any invoice going through.
Gail?
Just real quickly, yeah. When I was on the board, between 4 and 6 years ago, and did sign those checks all the time, there was an instance of a rather high-ranking employee who had abused the credit card, and it seemed as if concern about that was missing. So just an FYI, I mean, I think they can be misused, and I don't feel any of the people that I'm talking to in this forum are abusers. But I do think that there's an issue to think about here. Will probably be addressed in the purchasing policy. I hope so.
It will be, and I also think that's why you need the GM that holds people accountable, because that's their job. That's my job. If Jacob doesn't spend and follows the policy, then he needs to answer to me for that, because I have to answer to all of you.
Well, an unpleasant topic, but it was one that did come up, and
Fair enough.
Yeah, and sometimes, when you reform policies like that, sometimes you can get around some of the spending by carrying higher inventory levels. But unfortunately, sometimes that's extra spending, kind of the other side of that, where I've been at other properties where we didn't use this, but you ended up saying, well, just in case we do, we're going to buy a whole bunch of stuff. And it could be, it could roll over in the financial fiscal year to the point where we were reporting huge inventories to accounting. And they were like, why do we have all this? And that's part of the reasoning. So there's always trade-offs.
Any other questions or comments on the credit card policy? If not, I'm going to turn it over to the Joel Show for our financial statements, January 2021. Share your screen with us, please. No.
Can I just ask a really quick question? I am not able to get to the full financials through the link that's provided on the agenda. Is it just me, or is everyone having that problem?
I think they changed the link on the website, so then you would click on there's like a line for archive on there, and then you can see matter of fact, I'll tell you what, when I share the screen,
Okay.
Kelly, are you talking about through the email that's sent to us, or are you talking about on the Sun Valley website?
I clicked the link on the email. It takes me to the website, but there's nothing with the January statements.
I don't think it's posted on the website yet.
Oh.
It has been posted on the website. If I could just speak to that quickly, I will double check that link right now. Things have been moving around as we try to improve the website. And if there's an issue, I can fix that right now. Thank you for letting us know about that.
I was just looking at the page that says like financial reports, and it has 2020 monthly financial, but there's nothing for 2021 yet.
And I just download the document and just pull it up on my computer, so I don't use.
Well, this time it's in there, but sometimes it's not in there and we have to get it off the website.
I have a direct link I can post to the chat. Let's see here. I believe that should take you to the 2021 financial statements from what I'm seeing.
Thank you.
Did I get the right file?
okay, I guess I'll share the screen here. So everyone can see the balance sheet that I'm looking at right now.
Yes, we don't see the whole page, but when you scroll, we can see.
Okay, let me stop sharing. I'm going to click on a different screen. I had it on Rachel's monitor to the left, but this monitor is the size of Oregon, so it's blinding to look at. So I'm going to move it to this monitor over here. Okay. There. Now can you see the whole page? Okay.
All the way down to member equity for me, but for the majority, yes.
Oh, that's good. All right. So I'm starting out with the balance sheet like I always start out with. The reason why I'll start out with this because I'll talk about two things real fast. First thing is that PPP loan liability, that 357,700. Here it is sitting under operating loan liabilities, and the offset to this is, so this is the loan amount, what we owe. The offset to that is, if you want to know where is that money, it's actually commingled up here in operating cash. So that's where that amount is sitting up there. And then when this is forgiven, this 357, this amount right here will essentially drop off. Become equity. I won't get into that, but, and then, okay, so asset-wise, so everything looks fine. In terms of, like I've said this past months, the big thing is this net operating assets amount. This is what you want to see positive, which it is. It's a nice, comfortable positive. If this is running negative, then that means you are basically borrowing against, like prepaid dues and stuff like that. And but of course that number is not negative. It's a nice positive number. So things are fine from that perspective. This section that I pointed out, capital, this is just showing you your capital balances, cash-wise. And then when you get into the member equity section down in here, so this is showing you the equity. And the question was asked before about the special assessment revenue in terms of like what happens to it in 1 year if we don't use it. You know, you have a surplus, so to speak. And then like, where does that go? Basically where that goes is, and so like here's a surplus right here, 58,557, which ties to the rec combined statement and on the departmental income statement. But this 58,557 right here then rolls into this retained earnings amount right down here. And it's actually on our internal general ledger. It's actually, it'll be its own separate line item. So it's called rec special assessment equity is essentially what it is. So that's basically how it works from an accounting perspective. Meaning if you made $100 1 year, then when you do closing entries and you start out the year with no equity, so to speak, then when you close out the year, now you have $100 in equity is how it's going on. So then the next year, let's say you had a loss of $50, then basically you'll end up eating into that $100 equity at the end of the next year. So now from a bank's perspective, then you only have $50 of equity. You could think about it like that. So I guess you could kind of indirectly think about it like a piggy bank, so to speak. It's not quite what that is exactly, but it's kind of like that in a sense. Now, if I scroll to the next page, so for you, this is going to be page 32 in your finance packet. So here we're looking at, now what makes this easy is, I'll talk about, month to date, then I'll talk about year to date. And the end of January, this is where this gets really efficient because month to date is year to date. So we can just look at one number. And just for the sake of simplicity, since this is how you're used to always seeing it, I could have just gotten rid of this whole month to date or just shown a year to date, but they're both left on there since you're used to seeing that. But basically everything's repeating itself, as you can see across the columns here. In terms of net income, so we had $155,476 in net income at the end of January, as opposed to last year we had $94,044. So we're actually higher. So we actually we're higher than we were last year in terms of expenses. So 37,243 or 233,842 in expenses last year. The year before that, we had, let's see here. So we had 268,400 expenses last year. So last year we were actually over budget by expenses by about $7,000 versus this year we were under budget by 37,243. Now, in terms of, for example, I'll talk about, I talked about before in terms of the expense to revenue ratio, and all that is just a ratio of total expenses right here divided by your total revenues right there, and well, right here in this case. This is just giving you a ratio of for every dollar of expenses, or for every dollar of revenues, how much do you have in expenses? You can think about it like that. So a lower number is always better. So it was 60.1% at the end of January. At the end of January 2020, it was 74%. At the end of December, it was, of course, we were running a net loss, so it was over 100%, 102%. Okay, now this page right here, and I've talked about this before, but I'll just point it out again in terms of like how you could follow this. Now this page probably becomes the most useful to you once you start to learn about capital expenditures and how much do we have in capital funding and stuff like that. So like, for example, the SURF fund right here, net available cash at 12/31/2020, this 1.7 million, that number should tie back to, which I know it does, to the balance sheet right here, which was the ending balance at December 31, 2020. And then you see SURF right here, this 1.777 at the end of January 31, 2021. I would expect to see that number, which of course I do, right here, right there anyways. And this is just dues coming in, investment income. This number, this expenditures, basically this is going to be, a combination of expenditures. It's a catch-all number in terms of it could be stuff that actually were expenditures or spending on capital expenditures, stuff that will be later on capitalized to the balance sheet. And then down here is just giving you an outlook based off of our collection rate, or I mean, how much we have in collections that we expect to come in over the course of 11 months. And then this is the most important number right here that you would probably be the most interested in, this 404,344. This is the obligated expenses from the capital reporting spreadsheet that's also in your packet. In terms of, if you look at SURF, this is going to be everything that the board has approved, and then everything we're still on the hook for, so to speak. So let's just say we only had one project the board approved $100,000 in spending for roads, or for to buy a big truck, since this is SURF, and to buy 2 trucks. And then at this point, we had only purchased one of the trucks for $50,000. Well, we'd still see an obligated expenses of $50,000 left that we have to spend over, yet to spend. And then this gives us our net usable cash balance at the end, 2.5 million. This 600,000 is essentially the board recommended, kind of like don't fall below this line, carryover balance, which means this is about what you'd have to spend at the end of January, 1.9 million for SURF. And then roads, mailboxes, capital reserve holding fund, same exact pattern. So this first region here is the capital reserve funds. Then this region in here is your operating reserve funds, your emergency operations, and your UDR funds right here. And as I mentioned before, UDR funds is it's dues. It's the operating dues that we recoup that people pay us that they owed us from a prior year. So in this case, now that we're in 2021, if someone is paying their dues that they owed us from December and before, the operation portion of that would come into UDR. Now the capital portion of that, whether it was SURF, roads, or mailboxes, that still goes into the respective accounts over here. So it's only the operations portion of UDR, of past year's dues that go into the UDR column. And that stands for undesignated reserves too. Now, the good thing is it doesn't matter if we look at current month or year to date, since these are all the same exact numbers. Now, these numbers, you're looking at the income statement again, and these numbers will all tie right back to, like, for example, so that 155,476 number right here will tie right back to the income statement right here. And if you looked at the year to date, it's going to be the same, obviously, the same sort of thing. And then there's the how you were better than budget income-wise by 45,184. Now, last year, at the end of June 2020, you were worse than budget net income-wise by a little over 8,000. But this 45,184 right here will, there it is again right here. So you're looking at the income statement, but now you're looking at it at a purely departmental level. So you have the individual departments right here. Now, actual salary benefits, I guess a couple things that I'll point out now that I'm on this. Well, I'll talk about golf first, then I'll point out a couple of things, but since I always mention golf. So golf had $185,149 in revenue for June. Now, for January. January is always going to look higher because in between October, November, December, the prior year, when people prepay, so to speak, they buy a membership for the 2021 year. So it's like that money becomes a liability to us in October, November, December. And then in basically how we've been doing it here in years past is then in January, we just take that liability and recognize it all in January. So then it all shows up in January from the money that was received from golf to buy golf memberships for 2021 that they purchased between October and December. So it will all show up here. Now, baseline in terms of how it was last year at this time, so at the end of January 2020, this number was 158,681. So it's actually an increase of 26,468 over the prior year. So this is a combination of passes or golf memberships and so on and so forth, all the revenue, greens fees and all that purchased in January, and the stuff that was also purchased prior to that. So there's about approximately $60,000 or so that where people were prepaying for memberships, purchasing them between October, December of last year that also got recognized in January that makes up this number. Now the total expenses for golf, which is actually, it's this actual salary benefits number right here, and then the actual other expenses number right here. Those two, combine those two together and you have expenditures of 46,344. Now in terms of the net income for golf, so I'll just get you a comparison for how it was the year before. So golf had a net income at the end of January 2021 of $138,805. So they were better than budget by $45,616. Last year they had net income of $111,800, and then they were better than budget by $32,670 approximately. So it's definitely an improvement. They definitely improved from last year at this time for golf. Now, in terms of actual salary benefits numbers, you'll see that a lot of these numbers look positive, salary benefits better than last year this time. Now, a large degree of this, and this you'll see the exact same thing that happened that if you look back at the January 2020 statements, is basically the first payroll of the year in January. I'll take a look at this purely for accounting purposes and see how much of that payroll was, was related to 2020. So days that were worked during 2020 that got paid out on that very first payroll in January. And then I'll accrue that, I'll take that and I'll shove it back into 2020 is how that works. So it's basically I'm matching 2020 payroll expense into the period of which it belongs 2020. So then that creates a situation where it looks like in January, we were doing better in payroll wise. Now, if you look at December, that was the other end of that. It was the other end of the bookend, so to speak. So in December, the opposite happened, where December looked like payroll was higher than budgeted. And that was because I was shoving it back into December from 2021. So even though January benefits, I guess what I'm saying is January can look like it benefits, but December, at the end of December 2021 is where you'll pay the piper, so to speak, and then the two will balance out over the course of the year. Now, two things that I noticed looking at this, like looking at these, this department right here, HCC security, that looks like it's worse than budget for January by $28,390. Now, when I looked back and looked at this is a journal entry that I'm going to be making actually for the audit procedures. This appears to be just almost a software anomaly with the accounting software, where this is John Gordon's ACC, basically the fees that he charges us for the inspections that he does. And he tends to give it to us in a big batch at the end of the year is what he does. He did that last year as well. And then, so then I'll take a look at that batch when Davey first runs it through AP, and then she's coding it according to his invoice dates, which say January 1, 2021 on them. And then of course I'm looking at that to see, well, hold on a minute, a lot of this was really related to 2020. So then I kind of do what I do with payroll, to where like I push it back into 2020. So then I'll direct Davey change these, a whole bunch of these dates. It was quite a lot, probably around 27,000 or so, like recode that back into 2020, which she did. And the reports actually truly said it was coded back into 2020. And then I actually looked at the check stubs and looked at the check reports, and sure enough, it says in the system it was coded back in December 2020. But then when I look at the GL, I see somehow C3 swept it into January 2021. For whatever reason why I did that, in this one case, I'm going to be shoving that back into 2020. Because now that, from an audit perspective, that's a situation where if that check was pulled for audit, the auditors would clearly be in the, have every right to say this check really pertains to 2020. So I'm just preempting that. So I'll adjust some of that back. So basically the bottom line with this is this $145,000 476 right here. Once that's adjusted for, then the net income at the end of January really could be about 182,000. So that helps out January. Of course, it hurts December too. So then December's loss increases by the equivalent amount. But that's basically the big thing to point out here. The only other thing for maintenance you could see right here, 6,000. That's just a repair and maintenance, probably with the truck. It was one invoice for like $5,000. That's really driving that. But that would be the big takeaways from the financial statements for January, if anyone had any questions.
Questions from the committee? Is it clear, pretty clear to everyone? With it being January, it's easy to read through everything. We're only a month in.
Yeah.
If we don't have any questions from the committee, I will ask for John to come in and open the floor for community questions.
Sure. Yes. We do have a couple of attendees in the audience tonight. I do have a hand raised here. I'll go ahead and bring Linda on over. There you go, Linda.
Oh, I see I had to unmute in a couple of places. So here comes the bear in the room. So Jake, I'm going to say that this is real good that you're going to do all this work, but the portion that was the measure that was voted on by the membership did not include any mowing, did not include any firewise, and did not include any clean green. Those, that's not, if you look at anything, when we mow the sides of the road. It puts stuff down into the ditches. It doesn't take anything out. I just really wish you would take a look at that. The other question is, did you get any numbers from Joel? Because there was only in the reserve study, unless it's been adjusted since we got it for the budget, there was only $179,370 allocated for CBC. So that puts you, what, 41,300 over. So it's just, you may want to look at maybe just, absorbing the whatever you have for Firewise. Normally they charge for Clean Green. That's kind of an offset from the membership and stuff. So I really wish we'd look at that, our ditches and swales and the berms that have built up. Well, you know what the berms by my house look like.
Yeah, and so I know that not only the Larson Gross memo and then the voting and all that, described certain activities, and I was pretty clear in there. I mean, we're doing the activities that are listed.
I understand. I'm just saying that's still $40-some thousand over the road budget. If we do everything you guys had in roads tonight, the budget for 2021, Joel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sat and looked at my binder, the collectives to be spent out of roads for whatever needs to be done for 2021 is $1,202,093. With the changes for Southern Court being added and CBC updates, it jumps that number to $1,433,396. And so you're looking at over $200,000 extra money that we spent. It's real easy to say, hey, we got a whole bunch in there, but you should be looking at it. With the pool repairs, some of this stuff to clean and service the heaters, that's just regular maintenance. And there's $25,000 in the pool budget for 2021 to pay for stuff like that. So you may want to revisit that. The other question is this chemical controller. Is that for the quiet pool? Or the main pool?
I would have to pull that up here real quick. I'll speak to a little bit on the pools. The capital funding requirements over $2,500 and having a certain lifespan. The pool heaters haven't been cleaned since they were installed. So, a lot of that dictates how I can ask for things versus them being operations. Now the chemical controllers, I'll have
There's
to
a reason I ask you this. I don't know if you've looked, but there's a capital project that was for the quiet pool that you're going to have to do if you're going to open that this year. That was done. It's on the project list as 9719.6, and it was like for a whole bunch of equipment that needed to be replaced in the quiet pool. One of them is a controller, but there's a whole list there. There's still a huge amount of money left in that budget that it's like for something like $19,000, and there's only been 169 spent of it, according, Joel can back me up or look at it. But I wonder if that's that chemical controller, if we pay, I don't know why Sesco didn't do the work.
Yeah, I just looked up the work. It is on the sorry, I can't call it adult pool, the quiet pool. It is the quiet pool controller. So I'll get with Joel on that, and we'll have to confer on that. I'm not sure of the balance in that account and how close we are to closing that. But if that's the case, and
it's like there's no money been spent. I don't
will.
know if it's because we didn't open the pool last year. They opted not to do it, but she got the bid for it and it was
Yeah.
approved, run through the board and
And
everything
that may be a
else.
lapse in my carryover from, when Maddie
Yep.
left, and I was not aware of the line items in some of those capitals. So I'll follow up and get back to the finance committee through.
Hey, that's
Len.
cool. It's just like for me, if we service our heaters, it's just like Barron Heating comes out and services our furnaces and does, we spend a fortune on them in a year, but it's operational. It's not capital.
Right. Well, so
Last
the cleaning part is included in that. You could argue that's operational, but the replacement of the media and the filters
Yeah,
and
I
the
don't
new
know
controller.
what that all, I'm not sure, I'm not sure if that's that could be a capital. It could be enough that it has, that it's going to fall into that. But if
Okay.
you just look
I'll
at that
double
thing for
check
the
that.
quiet pool.
As
Well,
long
let's
as,
see.
the finance committee's, aware of how that money would be spent and is comfortable with that, and we all know what's happening, and there is a balance there, I would love to see that not have to be appropriated if we have enough remaining. I will check on that with
Okay,
Joel
just
and Glenn tomorrow.
just take a look at it.
Mhm.
And the only other thing I wanted to say is I don't know if everybody, when they were looking at the sander replacement, because I went to go look for it and I saw the price in 2023 or 30 to do it is really a whole lot more money to replace that than the under 10,000 we're spending this year, under 7,000 even.
Oh, you're referring to the future cost for this.
Yes.
That's the reserve study cost. Yes.
Well, I know, but you showed
Yeah.
that, and it's
Yep.
just, it goes to show that sometimes when you're looking into the future, things do cost more. And it's a shame we have to replace it now, but I get what you're saying about the sand and stuff and the hopper and if they sweat or anything else. The only other thing I have is for Joel, and it's with the PPP. You said our period for claiming stuff was done in November. So couldn't we get a spreadsheet of what sort of things? I know we can spend it on utilities and on payroll. So couldn't we just have like a draft of this is how much we've spent or whatever? If truly if the period ended in November, that we could just sort of get an idea of, well, what's it look like? That's all. I know somebody else asked that question too, the request for forgiveness. And I thought maybe even just looking at a spreadsheet, even for the board too, to understand better, here's what we applied for. Here's how, what our actual costs were this year, including the utilities and the payroll. That's all. And then I'm done. I don't know if anybody else wants to take a turn, but thank you for looking at that stuff for me, Jake.
Yeah, and one update for you. I'm looking at some of my preliminary numbers for February from Joel. The capital item for quiet pool pump house equipment, 9719.16, shows a balance of 168. But I'll get the follow up on that and get back to you.
But there's a lot of money left in there, and I don't know if they just didn't do the work. That's what I
will find out.
I
will find out, and we'll itemize that and see where we're at on that project.
Yeah, it's just something that you're going to have to do if you're going to open the pools. And I'd rather tell you now and have you go, well, Linda, that was just absolutely nothing, rather than you thinking that it's all there and somehow the ball got dropped and we're sitting and waiting for that stuff.
Yep, it's open, so I'll get to the bottom.
Sounds like a plan. I'm done, and that's all I have. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate
Thanks, Linda. Have a good night.
Keen eye.
And we do have another hand from Leslie this time. I'll go ahead and bring Leslie on over. All right, Leslie, you can unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Linda, you stepped on my toes. A couple of comments on the Southern Court. I didn't understand from what was in the on the agenda exactly what you were asking for. It appears that what is in there is an engineering estimate of how much the job will cost. And you are asking for approval to go out and get some bids to do the job. And perhaps a not to exceed number would have been a good thing to put in there at that point. CVC, back in 2016, we realized that the culverts and things hadn't been cleaned out ever. And it was going to be a couple of $1 million to go through the entire Sudden Valley and to do all of this work. And so a vote was put to the members to approve a certain amount of money every year. And because this was going to take 10 years to do all of the work throughout Sudden Valley, Larson Gross said that we could capitalize that amount instead of spending operating money for that. So that's where that came from. And I agree with the pool. I mean, the expenses for the startup for the pool, to me, this is operations money. This is something that you do every year. If you're talking about a filter, you're talking about disposable things. And I would much rather see it in operations as opposed to in capital. And the sand spreader, if it's a good price, that's wonderful. Joel, I have one for you. On page 32, I believe, where it says the contractor and professional services is $35,000 worse than budget. What happened?
So what goes in that line item, basically, this like, you probably heard me talking about John Gordon, his check.
Yeah.
So it's about 30,000. So that 30,000 of that is what that is. That goes in, that is
But we
quoted
get
under that
back to him, right?
segment. Yes.
We split the funds, so how can this be an expense to us?
Who split them? What do you mean? No, this is the amount that we pay John Gordon for his inspection work.
We really had that many.
Oh yeah, like he did this last year tour. Basically, he gave us like a whole stack of invoices at year end, like a lot of invoices.
Okay.
Enough that the check signers even said the same thing. What the heck is all of this? You know. So.
Yeah, that's just triple the amount that we were expecting to find in there.
Yeah, and also because of like I pointed out too, like the thing with the C3 for some reason C3, because Davey coded it. I saw her reports where most of that pertains to 2020, and because I actually told her to change it back to 2020 from January. And C3 still, for some reason, the GL swept that into January. So if it wasn't for that, that number would be a lot lower by about $28,000 or so.
Okay, which leads me into my final question. You talked about a couple of different places where things have been swept into January and you're going to be moving them back into December. So will you be publishing a supplemental statement for December?
Sure, I could, yeah. I could even do that once because the statements that you see online, I myself, like in the spreadsheets, will update those because I have to update it to get a more accurate balance sheet for the balance sheet to work each month, even in 2021.
Yeah, well, you're talking about moving all of these expenses back into December. And I mean, we finished the year at what, $77,000 in the hole. And so we would like to see how farther we're going to go if we put all those expenses back there.
Uh-huh. And actually, because the balance sheet, whenever I make adjustments in the GL, then whatever month I'm publishing statements, the December 2020 ending balance sheet has to get updated for it to balance in 2021. So the bottom line, basically, I won't pull it up again, but basically at the bottom of the equity section, those numbers automatically update to show you what the new income would be.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
And Leslie, to your point about the not to exceed, I think that's a good point, and we'll take it to the board that way with the numbers that were approved tonight.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Leslie. Have a good night.
And so that will conclude our community questions. Does anyone want to make a motion for us to adjourn if there's nothing else for the good of the order?
Motion to adjourn.
I have a couple of questions, Ken.
Okay, go for it, Callie.
The first one is, have we gotten any emails? I don't know if, I mean, I haven't received any emails at all from community, and I'm finding that, for instance, when Linda and Leslie speak up, that there's a lot of information that's really important, really valuable to know. And so, I mean, I think it's important that people know that they can email the committee and that we'll try to get answers to these questions up front. But I haven't seen anything come through, so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, Leslie emailed the board, so Glenn was included in that, and that gave him the opportunity to look up some of her questions. But she emailed the board. It is important for the community to know that they can email the finance committee. And John, is that email, can you repeat that finance committee email so I don't get it wrong?
financecommittee@suddenvalley.com.
Yeah, so we advertise that email in the e-blast that goes out, and it's also published in the Sudden Valley Views to encourage people to ask questions beforehand. And so those are good things for folks to remember.
And then my second question had to do with, it's been long, since a very long time, I will admit this, since I've been into the details of the Sudden Valley finances. So I need a little refreshing, and I'm thinking if I need a little refreshing, maybe some other people do too. Could we have some kind of workshop that explains the budget? I mean, it would have been nice to have the budget in front of me tonight as we were talking about some of these things. So can we, what the terms mean, what the different reserves are for, those types of things. I think that'd be really helpful in these discussions moving forward. I don't know if we can have something without inviting the public, but even if we have to invite the public, so what? I just think it might be worth thinking about.
That's a great idea.
You know what I can do, Callie, is I'll email you the PowerPoint slide that I use for the board orientation, where it talks about like different funds on there.
Okay. You're going to email it to the whole committee?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Great question. Any other questions or comments? I just want to say I think we covered a lot of ground tonight, and I think we're doing good work to make sure that our community is taken care of, and that things that are important like roads are getting addressed. And so I think everyone's doing a good job. And with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a second.
Second.
All right. Good night, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. Thank you. Same to you.
Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.